My name is Madison. I am 29 years old. And a few weeks ago, I heard my own father say I was too embarrassing to be seen with my brother's new in-laws. I was standing in the hallway, holding a mug of coffee, when his voice cut through the air from the living room. Your brother's in-laws are elite. You'll humiliate us. Don't ruin this. He said it like I was a line of bad code he needed to debug, not his daughter. My brother Tyler was marrying into the Sterling family, the literal definition of San Francisco royalty, and suddenly, my life was a threat to their carefully polished image. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Let me know your story down in the comments. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I didn't even let the coffee mug in my hand tremble. I simply turned around, walked back to my room, and set that cold ceramic cup on the coaster with clinical precision. In their world, I was just a messy data nerd, a tech-obsessed ghost living in their hallway. In my world, I was the architect of the very systems that kept their bank accounts from hitting zero. My father, Matthew, and my mother, Sarah, had spent years treating my career like a cute little hobby, but they were about to find out what happens when the hobbyist stops providing the infrastructure. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was strictly operational. I sat down at my desk, the blue light of my laptop screen reflecting in my eyes like a digital sunrise. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. For the last 3 years, I had been the silent investor in their version of family, providing them with a proprietary artificial intelligence forecasting tool I'd built from scratch. It was the secret sauce that allowed my father's mid-sized public relations firm to compete with the giants in San Francisco. They thought they were landing elite contracts because of Tyler's optics and my father's connections. They didn't realize they were actually running on a subscription they had never paid for, and the bill was finally due. I pulled up the terminal window. The lines of code scrolled past, a language my parents would never bother to learn. At 11:51 p.m., I had heard my father call me an embarrassment. By 12:03 a.m., I was looking at the master access keys for Bennett Analytics. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single shred of regret, but there was only clarity. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and tonight, I was closing the account. I didn't hesitate. I didn't send a warning text. I simply highlighted the primary access tokens and clicked revoke. One click, and the automated sentiment analysis tools for their 5 biggest clients went dark. Another click, and the lead generation algorithms I'd coded to find them, those elite connections, were deleted from their server. I wasn't just taking back my work, I was pulling the intellectual shield that allowed them to pretend they were as successful as the people they worshipped. Everything stayed silent in the house for hours, but, in my head, the numbers were already shifting. My parents and Tyler were busy packing suitcases worth $10,000 for a trip to Aspen that my software had indirectly funded. They were focused on the labels on their clothes, oblivious to the fact that the engine of their business had just been dismantled. Inside my room, my laptop glowed with a different kind of sunrise, the kind made of facts, numbers, and quiet retribution. They weren't going to be shocked by what they'd done to me. They were going to be shocked that I had finally stopped playing along. The hallway outside my room smelled like expensive leather and old money as they packed their final bags. I sat there, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and the zipping of suitcases, realizing that, for the past 5 years, I had been living in a house of no bars. I wasn't just the sister who worked in tech. I was the silent foundation of every luxury they claimed as their own. While my brother Tyler was busy curating his social media feed to look like a high-stakes power player, I was the one working 18-hour days to write the logic that kept his strategies from falling apart. I had been the secret investor in their version of a successful life, and they had repaid me by making me invisible. It was a masterclass in the trap of cruel normalization. My parents, Matthew and Sarah, hadn't woken up one day and decided to be villains. It was slower than that, more methodical. They had spent years convincing themselves that my labor was just a family utility, like electricity or water, something that should always be there but never needs to be thanked. They normalized the idea that because I was independent and self-sufficient, I didn't need the same love or recognition that they lavished on Tyler. In their eyes, my talent wasn't a gift. It was a resource to be mined to fund Tyler's $2 million lifestyle and my father's elite aspirations. I pulled up an old digital ledger on my secondary drive. The numbers didn't lie. Over the last 4 years, I had quietly funneled over $96,000 into accounts that covered their temporary shortfalls. I remembered one specific winter when I wore a coat with a broken zipper for 3 months because I'd sent my savings to bail out Tyler after he crashed a leased luxury car he couldn't afford. My mother had patted my hand and said, "You're so responsible, Madison. We're so lucky you're the stable one." Back then, I believed her. I thought stable was a compliment. Now I knew it was just code for useful. I looked at a photo Tyler had posted an hour ago, a selfie in front of a private jet with the caption, "Aspen bound with the best." My father was in the background, beaming with pride. It hit me then that my compassion had been a luxury. They had overdrafted for so long, the account was now permanently closed. This wasn't a sisterly disagreement or a family spat. This was a total system failure. They had built their entire identity on a foundation of my quiet sacrifices, and they were so arrogant they thought they could humiliate the very person holding up their world and suffer no consequences. As the front door finally slammed and the house fell into a heavy, expensive silence, I didn't feel lonely. I felt like a creditor who had finally finished an audit. The justification was complete. The time for being sensible was over. The house felt like a hollowed-out vault after they left. My father had left a thick manila envelope on the kitchen island, weighted down by a heavy crystal paperweight, a final physical reminder of his authority. Inside was what he called a family safety net, but to me, it was just a poorly drafted gag order. It was a formal non-disclosure agreement drafted by his firm, prohibiting me from discussing my business, my data models, or our family history with anyone in the Sterling circle. He didn't want an apology. He wanted a total system wipe of my identity. He was so terrified of the optics that he had calculated the risk of my presence and decided that a legal contract was the only way to mitigate the Madison factor. While they were soaring at 30,000 feet toward Aspen, convinced they were finally ascending into the elite world they worshipped, a different kind of notification illuminated my monitors. It was a high-priority email from the private office of William Sterling. The subject line didn't mention family or optics. It simply read, "Strategic Partner Request Aspen Flagship Unveiling." I sat back, the blue light of the screen feeling like a cold, clean shield against the toxicity I had just escaped. Minutes later, my phone rang. Madison. William Sterling's voice was measured, gravelly, and carried the weight of a man who didn't waste words on small talk. "The automated audit you ran on our regional logistics has flagged a discrepancy in the mid-Atlantic chain. If your forecasting is correct, we aren't just saving money, we're looking at a recovery of $20 million in lost revenue." I didn't smile. I didn't feel a rush of pride. I just pulled up the relevant dashboard. "My forecasting is always correct, William," I said. It wasn't a boast. It was an entry in a ledger. William didn't care about my messy nerd life, or whether I knew which fork to use at a 3-course dinner. To him, I wasn't a daughter to be managed. I was the architect of his empire's survival. "I want you in Aspen for the New Year's gala," he continued. "We are unveiling the digital wall of innovation at the flagship resort. Our board needs to see the person who pulled this company out of the slump. You'll be flying in on the company jet. My assistant has already cleared your schedule." I looked at the gag order my father had left on the counter. He was so busy trying to keep me out of the room that he didn't realize I already owned the building. They thought they were the ones leveling up by proximity to the Sterlings. They had no idea that I was the one holding the keys to the kingdom they were trying so hard to enter. The transaction was clear. They wanted my silence, but the Sterlings wanted my voice. And, in the world of high-stakes business, the highest bidder always wins. The flight to Aspen on the Sterling private jet was the quietest 2 hours of my life. There was no bickering about labels or frantic checks of the mirror to see if I looked elite enough. I sat in a leather seat that cost more than my parents' car, staring out the window at the jagged, snow-capped peaks. I wasn't there for the champagne or the social climbing. I was there because the foundation of a global empire had a crack in it, and I was the only one who knew how to fuse it back together. William Sterling was waiting for me at the private hangar. He looked older in the aspen light, more tired, but his eyes were sharp. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. As the vehicle drove us toward the flagship resort, he handed me a secure tablet. I need you to look at these public relations performance reports submitted by your father's firm over the last 2 quarters, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous frequency. We've been paying them a retainer of $150,000 a month based on these metrics. I scrolled through the files. My stomach didn't churn. It went cold, like the mountain air outside. I recognized the syntax immediately. I recognized the logic gates and the specific way the data was visualized. This wasn't just inspired by my work. These were the exact outputs from the access keys I had revoked just 48 hours ago. Tyler hadn't just been the golden boy who got the better bedroom. He had been a digital scavenger, harvesting my private data models and presenting them to the Sterlings as his own proprietary technology. This is my code, William, I said, my voice as flat as a dial tone. Every graph in this report is generated by a neural network I built in my bedroom 2 years ago. My brother didn't analyze these trends. He stole the raw data from my private server and put his name on the cover page. The silence in the vehicle was absolute. William looked out the window at the passing pines. Lying about metrics to secure a contract is more than a breach of trust, Madison. It's corporate fraud, he said quietly. If they've been billing us for technology they don't own and data they falsified, the legal implications are severe. I leaned back against the seat. For years, I had wondered what I had done wrong to be the embarrassing daughter. I kept thinking that if I just worked harder, if I was just more successful, they would finally see me. Now I realized they had seen me perfectly. They saw me as a gold mine they could rob while they locked me in the basement. This wasn't family drama anymore. It was a criminal investigation. And as we pulled up to the glittering entrance of the resort, where my family was currently preening for the cameras, I realized the optics were about to get very, very ugly. I looked at the ring on my finger, not a wedding ring, but a keycard to every secure server in the Sterling Empire. My father had wanted me to stay hidden to protect his reputation. He was about to find out that the only thing more embarrassing than a data nerd daughter is a son who's a common thief. The Sterling flagship in Aspen was humming with a specific kind of electricity, the kind that only exists in rooms where the combined net worth exceeds $2 billion. I arrived early, as requested, but not as a guest or a +1 to a brother who found me embarrassing. A coordinator handed me a badge printed in clean black letters. Madison Bennett, Data and Growth Strategist. For the first time in my life, my identity wasn't being minimized into the daughter who does something online. Inside the grand foyer, the digital wall of innovation stretched along the marble, glistening under $40,000 chandeliers. My frame sat near the center, larger than life. My photo, my name, and the description of the algorithm that had saved their empire from a post-pandemic slump. I stood a few feet from my own portrait, talking numbers with the chief financial officer, when I heard my mother's voice float in from the lobby. "Ethan, look at this chandelier. This is exactly the kind of environment we belong in," Sarah said, her voice high and nervous. Matthew followed, his suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting under the Sterling lights. They were preening, acting like they were the stars of the show, until William Sterling tapped his champagne glass, calling the room to a hush. "Tonight is about family and partnership," William began, his gaze sharp enough to cut through the glitter. Specifically, the people who held this company up when things looked impossible. He gestured toward the wall. "One of those people is someone very dear to us now." He pointed directly at my photo. This is Madison Bennett, the architect of our survival. The floor seemed to tilt for my family. My parents froze mid-sentence. Tyler's head snapped toward the sound of my name, his face turning a shade of pale that matched the white roses. William followed the line from the frame to where I stood. Madison, you're here. I can't imagine why your family never told us you were our Madison. Matthew and Sarah didn't apologize. Instead, they rushed toward me, their faces twisting into a desperate, oily flattery. Madison, honey, we were just so worried about you being stressed at home. We always knew you were a genius. My father stammered, reaching out as if to hug me for the cameras. It was a masterclass in the illusion of power from an empty wallet. They were so obsessed with the optics of wealth that they had failed to build any actual character. Their status was a leased shell, and now that the Sterlings were seeing the truth, they realized they had nothing of internal value to stand on. William Sterling stepped between us, his voice turning cold. I've reviewed the performance reports. Matthew, I know about the stolen code and the $150,000 monthly retainer you've been collecting for Madison's work. He looked at the security team. These people are no longer welcome at any Sterling property. Terminate their contracts and escort them out. I didn't say a word as my father begged or as my mother cried. I just stood there, shoulders back, watching my elite family be removed from a world they were never actually big enough to inhabit. The morning after the gala, Aspen was buried in fresh snow clean, white, and silent. I stood on the balcony of my suite, watching the sunrise over the peaks, feeling a stillness I hadn't known since I was a child. The debt had been settled. The audit of my life was finally over. I didn't waste my energy watching my former family fall. I was too busy building something that would last. I took the $150,000 strategic bonus William Sterling had wired to my account and used it to seed the Hidden Architect Foundation. It is a fund dedicated to supporting young tech talents who are being suppressed or exploited by the very people who are supposed to protect them. This was the transition from a justice of punishment to a justice of the planter. While the world focuses on the fire that consumes the villain, the true power lies in the forest you grow from the ashes. By founding the foundation, I made the actions of Matthew, Sarah, and Tyler small and irrelevant. Their cruelty was no longer the headline of my story. It was just the soil I used to plant something meaningful. I heard through the industry grapevine that my father's firm didn't survive the week. In a world built on optics, corporate fraud is a lethal contagion. The elite social circle they worshipped turned into a vacuum. No firm would touch Matthew after the Sterlings blacklisted him, and Tyler's career as a strategic visionary was revealed to be a total fabrication. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along, but the truth is, I had finally realized that our relationship was a subscription where I was the only one footing the bill. I realized that letting go of the bloodline was the only way to find myself. For 29 years, I'd been trying to calibrate my worth to a scale that was intentionally broken. Standing in the crisp mountain air, I understood that family isn't a biological mandate. It is a partnership based on mutual respect. I wasn't the embarrassing daughter or the useful tool anymore. I was the architect of my own sovereignty. I walked back inside, closed the balcony door on the cold Aspen air, and looked at my laptop one last time. There were no pleading texts or angry emails visible. I had already deleted their access to my life. I had found peace, not in their apology, but in my own silence. I sat in my new office, the sun setting over the San Francisco skyline, when my phone buzzed one last time. It was a message from Tyler, a long, desperate paragraph filled with words like family and second chances. He was begging for a loan to start over, claiming that mom was barely surviving and dad was in a deep state of depression. He mentioned that the social circle they once worshipped had turned into a vacuum, leaving them with nothing but the bills they couldn't pay. I didn't feel a sting of guilt or a rush of anger. I just rubbed my eyes, looking at the screen with total clarity. This wasn't a breakdown or a reconciliation. It was a final audit of a relationship that had been insolvent for years. I typed my response with the same clinical precision I used to write code. "You were never really my brother, Tyler," I wrote. "You were just a scavenger who stole the raw data of my life, while Dad called me a burden. I owe you nothing." But then, I delivered the final finisher, the one that would ensure they never forgot my name. I'm making a one-time donation of exactly $150,000, the exact amount you and Dad fraudulently took from the Sterlings, to a foundation that helps young tech students escape abusive homes. I am doing it entirely in your names. That is the only legacy you will ever have. I hit send and blocked the number before his reply could even land on my server. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting. I was finally closing the ledger on a family that had spent 29 years trying to make me feel small so they could feel tall. I realized that the real glow-up wasn't the six-figure salary or the recognition on a gold-framed wall. It was the moment I stopped handing my worth to people who only knew how to discount it. I looked at the primary dashboard for my Hidden Architect Foundation, watching the numbers shift as the donation processed, and then I finally closed the laptop. That night, for the first time in my life, I didn't dream of being accepted. I just slept through until morning, surrounded by the quiet peace of a life built on my own terms. If you have ever been looked down upon, remember that your value is created by you, not granted by others. Please share this video to spread that strength. Thank you for listening to my story until the very end.